Fred Rogers was more than just a kind neighbor on television. He was a combative individual. Burger King used a phony Mr. Rodney to sell hamburgers in a 1984 commercial. Fred called one person. Overnight, the advertisement vanished. He wasn't simply upset when the KKK utilized his voice to spread racist remarks directed at kids. He filed a lawsuit. However, even this guy would not breach one line. Fred took action when producers pressured him to sacrifice his morals. No one anticipated. Let's tell the whole tale. On March 20, 1928, Fred Rogers was born in Latrobe, Pennsylvania. His family had a lot of money. They lived in a large brick home with all the amenities a child could desire, and his father was a businessman. Music, toys, and books. Fred, however, did not feel fortunate. He was confined indoors much of the time due to health issues. Fred sat inside and watched through the window while other children played outside. He felt isolated, despite the comforts all around him. He was influenced by his loneliness. It made his heart sensitive to the emotions of others. He later exploited that emotion to make kids feel loved and seen. Fred was ill a lot as a kid. He had to spend weeks at home due to his asthma. His mother made an effort to improve the situation. She played the piano with him and made puppets for him. However, the loneliness persisted throughout the long days. He was also shy and put on weight. He was reticent in class. He watched people, although he didn't have many pals. He observed their feelings, including their joy, sorrow, and anxieties. Later, he would be able to communicate with millions of kids in a way that they could actually understand thanks to that unassuming talent. Something happened to Fred when he was about 11 years old, and he never forgot it. His neighborhood guys began referring to him as Fat Freddy. They yelled and laughed as they chased him for 11 blocks one day. Fred was frightened. He was hurt and ashamed as he ran out of breath. That experience scarred me. However, it also provided him with a goal. Later, he would discuss bullying on his show. As someone who had experienced it, not as a teacher, he taught children how to be nice, how to deal with sorrow, and how to advocate for themselves. One individual gave young Fred a sense of total affection: McFeely, his granddad. Fred went to his grandfather's property every Sunday. He felt liberated there. He could explore outdoors, run in the fields, and just be himself. "Freddie, you make my day very special just by being you," his grandfather would say. He would never forget those words. When he felt invisible, they gave him strength. In recognition of the man who made him feel special simply for existing, he later named a character on his show Mr. McFeely. Change came in high school. Fred was a timid fat student who still bore the burden of bullying when he started to Latrobe High. However, Jim Stumbaugh, a student, made contact with him and became a friend. Fred came out of his shell because of that companionship. He participated in school events and found he had a gift for leadership. Fred was president of the student council by his last year. He became active in public speaking, theater, and music. He became more self-assured, shed weight, and eventually started to believe in himself. That trip showed him the value of friendship and goodwill when he went from being a quiet boy to the leader. Fred enrolled at Dartmouth College in 1946, but a year later he switched to Rollins College in Florida. Everything changed with that decision. Fred discovered music at Rollins. He wrote more than 200 pieces after doing extensive research on it. In 1951 he earned a degree in music composition with honors. A piano sonata was his senior thesis. The classroom was not where that music remained. Later, his show would win over children's hearts. His soft tunes were used as teaching aids to help children comprehend love, emotions, and fears. When Fred visited home that year, he saw a television for the first time. There was a lot of slapstick pie and faces in the program he watched. He was not amused. He felt uneasy. He felt uneasy. It might be something lovely, he thought. What's wasting it? He was struck severely by that moment. It was more than a fleeting idea. It was an epiphany that changed my life. At that moment he made the decision to enter the television industry in order to assist children, not to gain fame. He was shown the power of media and its potential for good by just one black and white screen. In 1951, Fred relocated to New York and began working at NBC. He did backstage work on popular shows as the voice of Firestone and Your Hit Parade. He assisted with live production, stage changes and props. Every week NBC produced more than 1,000 hours of live programming. Although it was busy, Fred gained a lot of knowledge. Nevertheless, something felt off. He witnessed the power of sponsors and money over everything. He disliked the advertisements, the noise and the callousness. His choice was evident from that event. He had no desire to appear on commercial television. Thus Fred left that life behind in 1953. He had no desire to pursue ratings. He wished to foster children's development. In addition to studying child development under Dr. Margaret McFarland, he enrolled in a Pittsburgh seminary. He was studying more than simply religion. He was learning about children, their feelings, and how to communicate with them in a meaningful way. It was a strange route. Most folks only chose one option. He selected three: spirituality, psychology, and media. Later on, such combination would make his show unique on television. In the same year, Fred returned to Pittsburgh to work on a new project called WQED, which was the country's first community-funded educational television station. In 1954, the station began operations from a mansion that had been transformed. Despite having minimal resources and few members, they had enormous ideals. He was the sole puppeteer and co-producer at WQED, and even performed live on the organ. It wasn't a high-end production. Fred was the only one silently working on something spectacular in the background. Daniel's Striped Tiger, King Friday the 13th, Queen Sarah Saturday, X the Owl, Henrietta Pussycat, and Lady Elaine Fairchild are among the puppet characters he created. Numerous of them were named after actual persons in his life, including his wife, acquaintances, and co-workers. The purpose of the presentation was to introduce short children's films in a straightforward manner. Rogers, however, made it into something much more. He gave each puppet a personality and created intricate plots. The outcome, the Sylvania Award for Best Locally Produced Children's Show, went to the Children's Corner in 1955. NBC even carried it nationwide. Fred didn't want the attention, though. He let the music and puppets speak for themselves. Meanwhile, Rogers did something that most people wouldn't risk. He attended a seminary. He continued to work full-time at WQED while attending Pittsburgh Theological Seminary in 1955. He continued to work at his day job. Rather, he crammed classes into his lunch breaks. For 8 long years, this double life persisted. He would rush, sometimes without even taking off his work clothes, from the studio to the seminary and back. Additionally, he traveled to New York for weekly live shows with co-host Josie Carey. Nevertheless, he continued his studies. He had no intention of becoming a preacher. He had no desire for a pulpit. His goal was to uplift children's spirits and minds through television. He didn't go to a church after he eventually graduated in 1963 because of this. He did not leave the studio. That same year, however, something remarkable occurred. Fred Rogers received his Presbyterian ministerial ordination to assist children via television, not to lead a church. The ordination was the first of its sort. When the church saw what he was doing, they decided he didn't require pews and 4 walls. He was carrying a camera, and he touched millions of people with that camera. He conveyed a message of love, acceptance, and emotional honesty via every song, puppet show, and moment. Then came a pivotal moment that most people overlook. Rogers visited Canada in 1963. There, he developed Mr. Rogers, a 15-minute program that aired for 337 episodes at the Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, made their debut appearance on camera. He had remained in the background until then, but Fred Rainsbury, a CBC executive, persuaded him to take center stage. It wasn't simple. Rogers was timid and uncertain, but all changed with this Canadian version. He cultivated his soft style, addressed children directly, and started constructing what would eventually become the Pretend Neighborhood. The calm, compassionate Mr. Rogers that the world would come to know was shaped in part by that early Canadian performance. Not only did Fred Rogers return to Pittsburgh in 1966, but he carried something significant with him. He produced an early version of his children's show in Canada for a few years before purchasing the rights and starting over at WQED, a nearby public television station. He combined elements of his previous program, such as the neighborhood of make-believe, with fresh concepts that were more centered on actual events. Prior to receiving financing from the Sears Roebuck Foundation, it was only broadcast in Pittsburgh. Everything altered as a result. Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood, which subsequently changed its name to PBS, went national on the Internet on February 19, 1968. This was no ordinary children's program. Back then, the majority of children's television was slapstick-filled, fast-paced, and loud. Rogers took the opposite action. He reduced the pace. He established a serene and secure environment, and that modest little show had gained widespread recognition by the early 1970s. It has about 1,000 episodes and ran for more than 30 years. However, just the stats don't tell everything. Rogers established a tone every day from the first minute the show started. After entering and singing his theme song, he changed into sneakers and a cardigan. It wasn't random. It became a ritual. He took this action to make kids feel at ease. Additionally, the sweaters were unique. Until her death in 1981, his mother had crocheted each one by hand. The Smithsonian eventually acquired the well-known red cardigan. Intriguingly though, he wore green cardigans more frequently. Rogers was completely unaware of that. His color blindness was red-green. Even yet the act of changing clothes conveyed to children that they were entering a place where they were valued for who they were. Rogers traveled to Washington, D.C. on May 1, 1969, and gave a speech before the U.S. Senate. Nixon sought to reduce public television spending from $20 million to $10 million. Rogers carefully outlined the harm that will be done to kids. With fewer than 2 minutes of cartoons, his show only cost $6,000 a year. He talked quietly yet passionately. He once cited lines from his performance. John Pastor, the senator who was listening, was known for being tough. "Looks like you just earned the $20 million, he stated at the end. PBS wasn't the only thing saved by that moment. It demonstrated the power of a soft voice. Rogers took another audacious move a few days later on May 9, 1969, but this time it was on the show. He asked Francois Clemens, a black actor who portrayed a police officer, to soak their feet in a little pool with him in episode 1065. Although segregation in public pools was still a problem at the time, that scene may seem straightforward now. Rogers didn't give a speech. All he did was be kind. They had the pool to themselves. They both used the same towel, and it made it extremely evident that everyone is deserving of respect. Rogers thanked Clemens for everything, while privately washing his feet decades later. Even now, that one episode remains a silent yet potent protest against prejudice. The popularity of the show increased as more houses saw it. The audience continued to grow once it went national in 1968. It had 1.8 million American homes, and a 2.1% rating share by 1985-86. For a public television program, that was enormous. Rogers penned all of the show's scripts, made all of the puppets, and even wrote 13 operas and more than 200 songs. He created it from the ground up rather than merely hosting it. Reruns continued to be popular even after the final new episode aired in 2001. It grew to become one of PBS's longest-running programs. However, Rogers was dissatisfied with the general trend of children's television. He was concerned that a lot of shows were more focused on turning children into consumers than on fostering their development. He didn't mean that as a compliment, he once claimed. He declined to sell cereal or toys on his show. He even prevented Burger King from using his image in a parody advertisement. Rogers maintained his focus on the emotional needs of children, whilst other shows were centered around objects. That set him apart, and the business side of TV wasn't always fond of that. His principles were even reflected in his food habits. Rogers switched to vegetarianism around the beginning of the 1970s. "I don't want to eat anything that has a mother," he declared. He felt that animals should be treated with compassion, not only people. He was influenced by the book Diet for a Small Planet, and believed that vegetarianism was a sign of respect and love to every living creature. He never featured meat eaters on his show, There were no burgers or fish on screen if a scenario was set in a restaurant. He even composed a song to express his disapproval of the custom of killing newborn chickens for Easter. His identity was rooted in such empathy. Additionally, Rogers took a risk that most hosts of children's television wouldn't. He discussed difficult topics. He broadcast a special episode to help kids comprehend what happened in June 1968, just 2 days after Robert F. Kennedy was slain. Daniel's striped tiger, the puppet, inquired as to what assassination meant. Rogers did not sidestep the query. He gave an honest and straightforward explanation. He addressed issues including racism, divorce, death, and war over the years. He was assisting kids in understanding a complex universe from the first week of the show. He felt that discussing frightening topics made them less frightening. His faith in emotions lay at the heart of it all. He assured kids that all emotions, including fear and rage, were acceptable. Anything that can be discussed can be easier to handle, he remarked. To ensure that the show addressed actual issues that children encountered, he collaborated closely with child psychologists. He told them they were unique, but he went beyond that. He taught them how to deal with strong emotions. He made sure they knew they were loved for who they were, and provided them with the means to express themselves. Although Fred Rogers was well known for his sweet smile and soft voice, life was anything but peaceful behind the scenes. The Mr. Rogers Neighborhood set was a riot of laughter, jokes, and surprises from 1985 until 1990. Fred was more than a composed host. The staff enjoyed making fun of him because he loved having fun. One day, as he was getting ready to put on his sneakers, he entered the room humming his typical song. However, his shoes did not fit when he tried. They were far too little. Still singing, Fred tried till he started giggling. It was a practical joke. Jeff, one of the crew, had traded his sneakers. The actual ones, they were on Jeff. Fred was among those who laughed. Someone once left a pornographic picture for Fred to find. Fred made a joke out of it rather than a reprimand. As a Christmas present, he had it blown up into a gigantic billboard and presented it to the crew member. On set, that was the type of attitude. After retiring in 2001, Fred subsequently stated that he missed his playmates more than anything else. The Neighborhood was more than just television. It was genuine and brimming with happiness and love. Fred accomplished something unexpected in 1985. He exited the well-known set and presented the musicians who made the performance come to life. These weren't only supporting actors. They were experts in jazz. Carl McVicker Jr. on bass, Bobby Ross Thorne on percussion, Joe Negri on guitar, and Johnny Costa on keyboard. They didn't perform easy songs. In every episode they performed live, authentic jazz. Not even a script was used by Johnny Costa. He simply followed the moment while observing Fred. It gave the show a more authentic vibe. Fred did more than simply name them when he introduced them on television. He demonstrated to the children how each musician enhanced the enchantment. Such candor was uncommon on children's television. But Fred felt that children should know who made the program unique. It was his way of saying that each individual is important. You might never know Fred Rogers was a clergyman if you watched his show. He didn't give sermons. His entire teaching was based on faith, even though he made no mention of God. Patience, kindness, love, and listening. He considered his television program to be his ministry. He had to keep it secular because to public TV regulations. Nevertheless, Fred managed to include his convictions into each show. He spoke difficult topics like racism, divorce, and death with compassion rather than fear. He treated each child and visitor with dignity. He lived out his beliefs in that manner. Even if they never saw the cross he silently carried in his heart, millions felt it. The fact that Fred Rogers was a longtime Republican surprises some people. His message of acceptance and love seems to be at odds with that. Party lines didn't matter to Fred, though. People were important to him. He championed public television. He was an advocate for aiding the weak. He was criticized by conservative media in later years. He made children feel too special, they said. However, Fred continued. Fred's ideals were the reverse of Trump's, according to his wife, Joanne. Fred might have switched parties if he had lived longer. However, his deeds ultimately spoke louder than his voter registration. He demonstrated that empathy can originate from any source. The actor who played Officer Clemens, Francois Clemens, was one of Fred's closest friends. He became the first black guy to have a recurrent role on American children's television when Fred cast him in 1968. Although they were like family, they went through a difficult time. Fred requested Francois to keep his sexual orientation a secret after he found out. "You may lose your job at that time if you were openly gay." Fred was worried that the performance would be cancelled. Francois even married a woman after his encouragement, but the marriage ended in divorce. Fred apologized years later. He embraced Francois's partners, and helped him. They were still close. Although Fred avoided discussing LGBTQ problems in public, he delivered a subliminal message of love and change by casting Francois, taking a footbath with him on TV, and supporting him. Not every difficulty originated internally. Something terrible occurred in 1990. The Ku Klux Klan started spreading hate by impersonating Fred Rogers. The messages on the tapes were vicious and bigoted, yet they sounded like they were from Mr. Rogers' neighborhood. A lynching was even described by one targeted kids in schools who shared the phone number. Fred was devastated. His business quickly filed a lawsuit. A federal judge ordered the Klan to halt and turn over all of the tapes within a day. It wasn't for himself, but it was one of the few times Fred utilized the law as a weapon. It was done to shield kids from hate that was passed off as compassion. Fred was frequently made fun of. One of the most well-known was Mr. Robinson's Neighborhood, starring Eddie Murphy. Fred was unconcerned. Sometimes he had to intervene, but he saw it as a loving joke. Burger King used a phony Mr. Rodney in a 1984 burger commercial. Fred called once courteously. The advertisement vanished. It only required that. Fred, however, didn't think twice about filing a lawsuit when someone went too far, such as by wearing a t-shirt with a pistol in his palm. He didn't mind being made fun of. Trust was important to him. Kids had faith in him. That was crucial. Fred Rogers lived out his teachings of kindness and love. He married Joanne Bird Rogers, a pianist and teacher he met at Rollins College, for 49 years. In 1952, he wrote a handwritten letter proposing. Joanne misplaced the letter while rushing to call and say yes, yes, yes since she was so excited. They had a quiet yet profound love story. It wasn't about dazzling scenes. It has to do with mutual respect, trust, and values. James was one of their two sons. John was born in 1961, while John was born in 1959. Both said the same thing when they appeared on Mr. Rogers' Neighborhood from time to time. The man depicted on the video was exactly their father. Joanne supported him through all of life's phases. His anchor was her. When things were tough, Fred frequently said that she helped him see clearly. In addition to her accomplishments, Joanne's significance to Fred was also acknowledged when she died in 2021 at the age of 92. Additionally, Fred had small rituals of his own that demonstrated his seriousness about leading an intentional life. He maintained his weight at precisely 143 pounds for more than 30 years. What's that number? Because it signified love you to him. I have one letter, love has 4, and you have 3. Every day after swimming, he weighed himself. He would adapt if he gained or lost a pound. He became who he was because of that number. In fact, so much so that Pennsylvania created the 143rd day of the year as a celebration of his loving message. The scale was just one part of Fred's routine. He up early, swam laps, read the Bible, prayed, napped, and went to bed by 9:30. He didn't drink or smoke. He even abstained from caffeine, sipping postum, a coffee substitute. Splashing Kahlua over ice cream is his one sinful pleasure. That was it. He famously said, "Don't eat anything that has a mother." He even abstained from eating meat. Fred was a quiet rebel who chose self-control over self-indulgence in a world full of TV celebrities who were notorious for their crazy behaviors. August 31, 2001, was the day of his last program. The 9/11 attacks, which occurred just 11 days later, permanently altered the course of history. After 895 episodes and 33 years, Fred had already bid farewell, but he was needed once more when the tragedy occurred. In order to record special public messages, he returned for a quick visit. In a time of upheaval, his counsel to seek out the helpers was consoling. He helped the entire nation breathe again, not just the children. Fred had meticulously plotted Mr. Rogers' neighborhood's demise. One of his favorite subjects, the arts, was the focus of the last week of performances. In those final episodes, each farewell was deliberate. Lady Elaine, too. In an art competition, the Mischief Maker puppet awarded prizes to all participants. Finally, Fred remarked in a soothing manner, "Always make every day a special day, simply by being yourself, you know how." He was aware that his time was limited, so he also got ready for that. He collaborated with psychologists to assist parents in discussing death and mourning with their kids. He thought that being honest was preferable to sugarcoating harsh realities. He wanted kids to understand that it was acceptable to ask questions and to feel unhappy. He even said that it was okay to respond to those questions because no one knew for sure. But I think the hardest part came when Fred began to have stomach pains in late 2002. When doctors finally looked inside, they discovered that the cancer had spread, but Fred persisted. He was the Grand Marshal at the Rose Parade on January 1, 2003, which was his last public appearance. Shortly after the doctors removed his stomach, he spent 10 days in the hospital, and when he got home, he played the piano. Fred Rogers died at home in Pittsburgh a few weeks later on February 27, 2003, the day after his grandson's birthday. Family was all around him. His diagnosis had only been made 2 months beforehand. While the nation grieved, Fred left behind more than just memories. He left behind a way of life, a code of silence, and the conviction that compassion, even in tiny amounts, can make a big difference in the world, and that each individual is unique.